Swamped at work, babe. Don't wait up. That's what he texted me at 7:43 on a Thursday evening. And I would have believed him, the way I had believed him every Thursday for the past 4 months. Except that at 7:43, I was sitting in my car in the parking garage of his office building, watching the lobby through the glass doors, and he wasn't there. His car wasn't there either. I'd driven downtown that evening because I wanted to surprise him. We hadn't had dinner together in weeks. I picked up Thai food from the place he loved on Clemens Street, the one with the green curry he always said was the best he'd ever had. And I'd thought maybe we could eat at his desk, just the two of us, the way we used to do when we first started dating and everything felt spontaneous and a little bit electric. I was 31 years old, and I had been married for 3 years, and I had been telling myself for 4 months that the distance I felt was just stress, just the economy, just life settling into itself the way life does. I sat in that parking garage for a long time. Then I drove home, put the Thai food in the refrigerator, and started paying attention. My husband worked in commercial real estate. That's important to understand because it explained away a lot of things that should not have been explained away. Late nights, weekend site visits, client dinners. I was never invited to because, he said, they were boring and I would hate them. Trips to Sacramento, to San Jose, to a development project in Phoenix that seemed to require his presence every other week between September and December. I was a pediatric occupational therapist. I worked with kids 3 days a week and I thought about other people's children constantly, which maybe meant I wasn't thinking clearly about my own life. His name was Colin. We had met at a mutual friend's birthday party when I was 26, and he had been so certain about everything, about his career, about where he wanted to live, about me, that I had found it deeply reassuring at a time when I was uncertain about most things. We got married on a Saturday in October at a vineyard in Napa. It rained in the morning and was perfect by noon. My mother cried. I cried. He didn't cry, but he held my hand through the whole ceremony, and I thought that was better than crying, actually. I thought that was someone who was steady. I kept that version of him in my mind for a long time after I should have let it go. The first thing I noticed, once I started paying attention, was the credit card. We had a joint account and 2 individual accounts, his, mine, which had seemed perfectly reasonable when we set it up because we were both adults with our own financial histories, and neither of us wanted to feel monitored. I handled our joint bills. He managed the mortgage, the car payments, and the investment accounts because finance was his world, and he was better at it and I had trusted him completely. That was the part I had to sit with for a while, how much I had trusted him. I started looking at the joint statements more carefully. Nothing unusual there. Then one evening in January, I was clearing out a pile of mail on the kitchen counter, and I found a credit card statement that had been opened and slid back into its envelope, the flap not quite sealed. His personal card. I'd never looked at it before. I almost put it back. I didn't put it back. The charges were ordinary on the surface. Gas, parking, a hardware store in the Sunset. But there were also 2 charges I didn't recognize, both from the same restaurant on Union Street, both on Thursdays, both for amounts that seemed right for 2 people having dinner with wine. And there was a charge from a hotel in Soma, $94. A Tuesday afternoon. I put the statement back in the envelope. I went upstairs. I ran the shower even though I didn't need a shower, and I stood in the bathroom with the water running and I tried to think clearly. I did not confront him that night. I had learned from years of working with children and families in crisis that the worst thing you can do when you suspect something is to move before you're ready. You wait. You watch. You gather. I started keeping notes in a password-protected document on my laptop. Dates, times, charges, anything that felt off. I pulled our cell phone bill, which I had always ignored because Colin handled it, and I looked at the call logs for his line. There was a number that appeared repeatedly, not a contact name, just a number with a 415 area code. It appeared most often on Thursday evenings and Tuesday afternoons. It appeared sometimes in the middle of the night. I did not call the number. Instead, I called my attorney. I want to be honest about this part because I think it matters. I didn't call a friend first. I didn't call my mother. I called the attorney who'd helped me set up my own LLC 3 years earlier when I was doing some contract OT work on the side, and I told her what I suspected, and I asked her what I should do. She told me 3 things. First, do not confront your husband yet. Second, do not move any money. Third, document everything you can access legally and bring it to her. So that's what I did. Over the next 6 weeks, I built a file. I made copies of every financial document I could access, the mortgage statements, the investment account summaries he emailed to himself, which came through our shared home email account on the laptop, the credit card charges, the phone logs. I photographed them and uploaded them to a private cloud folder my attorney had set up for me. I also hired a private investigator. I want to say that plainly because I've heard people suggest there's something sordid about it, something paranoid or obsessive, and I disagree. I had a reasonable suspicion and no way to confirm it, and I was looking at potentially dismantling a life I had built over the past 5 years. I needed facts. I paid for facts. The investigator's name was a woman named Shirley, and she was 60 years old and matter-of-fact in a way that I found deeply comforting. She told me what to expect, what she could and couldn't document, what California law allowed in terms of admissibility. She did not editorialize. She just worked. She came back to me in 3 weeks with a file and a quiet expression that I already knew how to read. I looked at the photographs alone on a Wednesday morning while Colin was at work. They were taken outside a restaurant on Union Street. The same restaurant, the same charges, on a Thursday evening 2 weeks prior. Colin and a woman I had never seen before. Leaving together, his hand at the small of her back the way he used to place his hand at the small of mine. They were laughing at something. She was younger than me, I thought, though it was hard to tell from the angle. She had dark hair and she was carrying a bag I recognized as expensive. There was also a photograph taken outside a hotel in the financial district. The same hotel that appeared on his statement in October, in November, in December, and now again in January. Colin and the same woman entering together on a Tuesday afternoon. I closed the laptop. I sat at the kitchen table for a while. The house was very quiet. We had a cat, a gray tabby named something ridiculous that we had adopted together the year before, and he came and sat on the table next to me, which he wasn't supposed to do, and I let him because I didn't have the energy to tell him no. Then I called my attorney. She had been doing family law for 22 years and she had, I suspect, seen everything. She looked at my documentation file and the investigator's report and she was quiet for a moment and then she said, "You've done the right things in the right order. That's not as common as you'd think." We talked for 2 hours. California is a no-fault divorce state, which means the infidelity itself doesn't technically affect the division of assets, but the financial picture mattered enormously, the investment accounts. The property, a piece of commercial real estate in his own name that I had not known about, which my attorney had found through a title search once I gave her permission to look. That part was the one that made me feel cold in a specific way. Not just that he had been unfaithful, that he had been managing money around me. That there were things structured in ways designed to make them harder to reach. "He's been moving things," my attorney said in the same tone you might use to note the weather. "Not illegally, but strategically, which means we need to move too." I asked her what that meant. She told me. I went home that afternoon and I made dinner, pasta, the kind he liked, with Italian sausage and crushed tomatoes and fresh basil from the pot on the windowsill that I kept alive all winter by moving it around to catch the light. I set the table. I poured wine. I asked him about his day and I listened to him tell me about a deal that was getting complicated. A client who was being difficult, the usual frictions of his professional life, and I nodded and I asked follow-up questions and I said, "That sounds frustrating." He reached across the table and squeezed my hand. "I don't know what I'd do without you," he said. "I mean that." I looked at him. He was earnest. He believed what he was saying, which was somehow the hardest part of the whole thing. "I know," I said. That night I slept maybe 4 hours. I was not crying. I was not angry, exactly, though the anger was there. I could feel it like something solid sitting in the middle of my chest, patient and absolutely present. I was mostly just thinking about what my attorney had told me and what I needed to do next, and how I was going to feel when this was over. I decided, somewhere around 3 a.m., that I was going to be okay. Not because I was certain, but because I had been through things before and I had been okay before, and I knew from working with families in the hardest moments of their lives that okay is not a fixed state. It's a direction. You point yourself toward it and you keep moving. I served him the divorce papers on a Friday morning. I had thought about timing carefully. My attorney had suggested a Friday because it meant a weekend buffer before he could do anything legally significant, and it meant his attorney wouldn't be immediately reachable, and it gave me time to move myself out of the house if I wanted to. I had already moved some things: my grandmother's jewelry, the documents, the external hard drive with our photos, items of genuine personal significance, to my sister's apartment in the Richmond district over the previous 2 weeks, a little at a time, in my regular work bag so nothing looked unusual. The process server arrived at the house at 9 in the morning. Colin was in the kitchen in his work clothes, drinking coffee, about to leave. I was upstairs. I heard the door, heard the low exchange of voices, heard the silence that followed. I came downstairs. He was standing in the kitchen with the envelope in his hand unopened, and he was looking at me with an expression I had never seen on his face before. Something collapsing in it, something that was either shock or the performance of shock. I had stopped being able to tell the difference. "What is this?" he said. Not a question, really. "You know what it is," I said. He put the envelope on the counter. He said my name. He said, "Can we talk about this?" "We can talk through our attorneys," I said. "That's the appropriate way to handle it. This is—" He stopped, started again. There's an explanation." "I know about the hotel," I said. "I know about Thursdays. I know about the Union Street restaurant, and I know about the account you opened in October, and I know about the property on Franklin Avenue that you didn't tell me about." I kept my voice steady. I had practiced keeping my voice steady. "I'm not interested in an explanation. I'm interested in a fair settlement." He sat down at the kitchen table. I want to say that he looked guilty and devastated, and that he cried and begged, because I think that's the story people want. What actually happened was quieter than that. He put his face in his hands for a moment. When he looked up, his expression had changed into something I recognized as calculation. He was already thinking about the next move. "I didn't want it to end this way," he said. That's the sentence I keep coming back to. Not "I'm sorry," not "I love you," not even "I messed up." He didn't intend for it to end this way. As if the way it ended was the problem. "You intended for it to end," I said. "The way was always going to be up to me." I picked up my keys in my bag. The cat was sitting on the couch watching us with the supreme indifference of a creature who has correctly assessed his own power in the household. I left. The divorce took 8 months. California has a mandatory 6-month waiting period after filing, which my attorney had prepared me for. And then there were negotiations about the assets that took longer than they should have, because his attorney initially tried to characterize the investment accounts as separate property, which they were not, and because the Franklin Avenue property required a full appraisal and a title history that took additional weeks to untangle. There were moments when I was tired. I want to be honest about that too. There were evenings when I sat in my sister's spare bedroom surrounded by boxes, and I felt the full weight of what I was doing. Not just ending a marriage, but reconstructing an entire understanding of a 3-year period of my life that I had thought I understood. Every memory was slightly different now. Every late night, every canceled plan, every time he'd squeezed my hand and said something genuine, I had to look at all of it again from a different angle. My therapist said that was normal. She said the mind doesn't like revising its own narrative. It resists. It finds the inconsistencies first and patches them, and then it has to be walked back through the whole story again from the beginning. I walked myself back through the whole story again. What I found when I did that was this: I had not been foolish. I had been trusting. Those are not the same thing. Trusting is not a flaw. It's something extended in good faith that was returned in bad faith. The problem was not mine to own. That took a while to believe, but I got there. The settlement came through on a Wednesday morning in early September. My attorney called me while I was parked outside a school where I had a session scheduled, and she told me the final numbers, and I sat in my car with the windows down and the smell of eucalyptus coming in from the schoolyard trees, and I tried to absorb the fact that it was over. The settlement was fair. More than fair, actually. The investment accounts, correctly categorized as marital assets, were divided equally. The house was sold and I received my half. The Franklin Avenue property, because it had been purchased during the marriage with funds that were traceable to our joint income, was also considered marital property, which his attorney had fought and lost. I wasn't wealthy, but I was stable. I was starting from something instead of nothing. I walked into that school and I did my job, and I watched a 7-year-old named, well, I won't say his name, but he had been struggling for months with fine motor tasks. And that day he managed to button his own jacket for the first time, 3 buttons in a row. And he looked up at me with an expression of pure astonished pride, and I thought, there it is, that's the thing. That's the part of the world that stays true. People ask me sometimes what I would have done differently. I think they want me to say I would have caught him sooner, or I would have been less trusting, or I would have monitored the accounts from the beginning. But I don't think that's right. What I would have done differently is this: I would have trusted my own perception sooner. Not my suspicion, my perception. There were moments before I found the statement. Before I sat in the parking garage when something felt wrong and I talked myself out of it. Not because I was naive, but because I was busy, and because it was easier, and because I loved the version of my life I thought I was living. The grief was real. I want to say that clearly because I think sometimes people assume that when you find out you were deceived, the love retroactively disappears, and it doesn't. You can grieve something and also know you're better without it. Both things can be true at the same time. The difference, in the end, was that I chose to see what was actually there. I didn't look away. That's not a small thing. For a lot of people, the looking away is the easier thing to do, and I understand why, and I don't judge it. But I couldn't do it. I needed to know the truth more than I needed to preserve the comfort of not knowing. And once I knew, I was ready. I didn't need him to be sorry. I didn't need him to understand the damage. I didn't need a dramatic confrontation or a satisfying confession or even an acknowledgement that what he did was wrong. I just needed my share of what we had built and the freedom to build something else. I have that now. The cat lives with me, which feels right. He sits in the window in the mornings and watches the street below with the same absolute confidence he always had, completely certain that whatever comes next will be navigable. I'm starting to feel the same way. The thing about a parking garage on a Thursday night is that it's just concrete and fluorescent light. There's nothing dramatic about it. No music, no revelation, no moment where the world shifts on its axis and announces itself. I sat in my car and looked at empty space where his car should have been, and I thought, I already knew. I had known for a while, I just hadn't been willing to look directly at it yet. That's the part I think about most now. Not the credit card statement. Not the photographs Shirley handed me in that quiet, matter-of-fact way of hers. Not even Colin sitting at our kitchen table with his face in his hands, already calculating his next move while I was still standing in the same room. The part I think about is the months before, when something felt wrong and I talked myself out of it, because I had confused trust with willingness to be deceived. Those are not the same thing. I know that now. What I did right. And I'm not saying this to congratulate myself, I'm saying it because I think it's the only honest accounting, was that when I finally stopped looking away, I moved with my head and not just my heart. I called my attorney before I called anyone else. I built a file before I had a conversation. I made sure I understood what I was walking into before I walked into it. That wasn't coldness. That was something I had to learn to call by its right name. Clarity. The willingness to see a situation as it actually is, without flinching. And then respond to what's real rather than what you wish were real. And the days after the papers were served, when I was living in my sister's spare bedroom surrounded by boxes, when the whole architecture of a life I'd built was in the middle of being taken apart and put back together differently. I had to find something to stand on. Not anger, because anger burns out. Not grief, because grief comes in waves and you can't build on waves. What I found, slowly, was something steadier. The knowledge that I had handled myself with integrity, that I hadn't lied, hadn't hidden assets, hadn't tried to destroy him even when I had documentation that could have made things considerably uglier. I wanted my fair share. I got it. That was enough. I think about the 7-year-old I worked with that September afternoon, the day the settlement came through. The one who buttoned his own jacket for the first time. 3 buttons. He looked up at me like he had just done something that mattered, because he had. That's what I keep coming back to. Things that are genuinely hard, done anyway, with patience. That's the only real version of strength I've ever found worth trusting. Not the kind that announces itself. The kind that just keeps showing up until the work is done. Colin said he didn't intend for it to end that way. I believe him. But intentions don't build a life. Choices do. And eventually, every choice finds its way back to you. Not as punishment, not as reward, just as consequence. The shape of what you built with your hands. I have the cat. I have my work. I have a smaller apartment with better light and a windowsill where things actually grow. I have a life that is entirely honestly mine. That turns out to be worth more than I knew how to value before.